Good morning. Thank you for joining me this day. This morning we'll be in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 8. One sec. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Tell the Israelites, this is the kind of creature you may eat from among all the animals that are on the land. You may eat any among the animals that has a divided hoof. The hooves are completely split in two, and that also chews the cud. However, you must not eat these from among those that chew the cud and have divided hooves. The camel is unclean to you because it chews the cud, even though its hoof is not divided. The rock badger is unclean to you because it chews the cud, even though its hoof is not divided. The hare is unclean to you because it chews the cud, even though its hoof is not divided. The pig is unclean to you because its hoof is divided. The hoof is completely split in two, even though it does not chew the cud. You must not eat from their meat, and you must not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. These you can eat from all creatures that are in the water, any creature in the water that have both fins and scales. Whether in the seas or in the streams you may eat. But any creature that does not have both fins and scales, whether in the sea or in the streams, from all the swarming things of the water, and from all the living creatures that are in the water, are detestable to you. Since they are detestable to you, you must not eat their meat, and their carcass you must detest. Any creature in the water that does not have both fins and scales is detestable to you. These you are to detest from among the birds. They must not be eaten, because they are detestable: the griffin vulture, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the buzzard of any kind, every kind of crow, the eagle owl, the short-eared owl, the long-eared owl, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the screech owl, the white owl, the scops owl, the osprey, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. Every winged swarming thing that walks on all fours is detestable to you. However, this you may eat from all the winged swarming things that walk on all fours, which have jointed legs to hop with on the land. These you may eat from them: the locust of any kind, the bald locust of any kind, the cricket of any kind, the grasshopper of any kind. But any other winged swarming thing that has 4 legs is detestable to you. By these you defile yourselves. Anyone who touches their carcass will be unclean until the evening, and anyone who carries their carcass must wash his clothes, and will be unclean until the evening. All animals that divide the hoof, but it is not completely split in two, and do not chew the cud, are unclean to you. Anyone who touches them becomes unclean. All that walk on their paws among all the creatures that walk on all fours are unclean to you. Anyone who touches their carcass will be unclean until the evening, and the one who carries their carcass must wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. Now this is what is unclean to you among the swarming things that swarm on the land: the rat, the mouse, the large lizard of any kind, the Mediterranean gecko, the spotted lizard, the wall gecko, the skink, and the chameleon. These are the ones that are unclean to you among all the swarming things. Anyone who touches them when they die will be unclean until evening. Also anything they fall on when they die will become unclean: any wood vessel or garment or article of leather or sackcloth. Any such vessel with which work is done must be immersed in water, and will be unclean until the evening. Then it will become clean. As for any clay vessel they fall into, everything in it will become unclean, and you must break it. Any food that may be eaten, which becomes soaked with water, will become unclean. Anything drinkable in any such vessel will become unclean. Anything their carcass may fall on will become unclean. An oven or small stoves must be smashed to pieces. They are unclean, and they will stay unclean to you. However, a spring or cistern which collects water will be clean, but one who touches their carcass will be unclean. Now if such a carcass falls on any sowing seed which is to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed, and such a carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Now if an animal that you may eat dies, whoever touches its carcass will be unclean until the evening. One who eats from its carcass must wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening, and whoever carries its carcass must wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every swarming thing that swarms on the land is detestable, and must not be eaten. You must not eat anything that crawls on its belly, or anything that walks on all fours, or on any number of legs of all the swarming things that swarm on the land, because they are detestable. Do not make yourselves detestable by any of the swarming things. You must not defile yourselves by them, and become unclean by them. For I am the Lord your God, and you are to sanctify yourselves, and be holy, because I am holy. You must not defile yourselves by any of the swarming things that creep on the ground. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God, and you are to be holy, because I am holy. This is the law of the land animals, the birds, all the living creatures that move in the water, and all the creatures that swarm on the land, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the living creatures that may be eaten, and the living creatures that must not be eaten. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a woman produces offspring and bears a male child, she will be unclean 7 days, as she is unclean during the days of her menstruation. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin must be circumcised. Then she will remain 33 days in blood purity. She must not touch anything holy, and she must not enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. If she bears a female child, she will be impure 14 days, as during her menstrual flow, and she will remain 66 days in blood purity. When the days of her purification are completed for a son or for a daughter, she must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a sin offering to the entrance of the meeting tent to the priest. The priest is to present it before the Lord and make atonement on her behalf, and she will be clean from her flow of blood. This is the law of the one who bears a child, for the male or the female child. If she cannot afford a sheep, then she must take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and one for a sin offering, and the priest is to make atonement on her behalf, and she will be clean." So you have the regulations concerning what may be eaten among the Israelites, among the land animals and among the flying things and the swarming things and things in the sea. And you have the things that are unclean to the Israelites, and what's to be done if one of those things dies and its carcass touches something. And then you have the laws concerning childbirth, and what's to be done for the male child and the female child and the mother. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. This begins a section over the next 5 chapters dealing with matters of ceremonial impurity and separation from impurity. God spoke this to Moses and Aaron because they involved both the government and the priesthood, Moses being the government and the priesthood being Aaron. After 10 chapters of laws dealing with the priests and sacrifices, here we come to the laws which touch the ordinary and everyday life of the people. God is interested in every detail of their lives. He issues his commands as to what they may eat and what they may not eat. Even in the days of Noah, there was a distinction between clean and unclean animals, but this may have only been for the purpose of sacrifice. Still, there was an early basis for these laws that God gave to the children of Israel. The reasons for the dietary laws are not clearly presented, and many have suggested the reasons. The suggested reasons fall into several categories: symbolic, ethical, aesthetic, hygienic, morphological, and theological criteria. From all these, the purpose of these dietary laws can be summarized in 3 points. The dietary laws gave the Israelites an opportunity to demonstrate obedience to God. Overall, God's intent was to make Israel a holy nation, separate them from the other nations, obedient to God not only to their bellies, Just as the first law God gave to humanity had to do with what could and could not be eaten, so these laws were given to Israel as a test of their obedience and separation to God. The dietary laws separated the Israelites from their Gentile pagan neighbors. This limited the true fellowship and connection an obedient Israelite could have with the surrounding people who did not worship or obey Yahweh. As well, some of these animals declared unclean for eating were animals that were idolized in pagan religions. The dietary laws helped to protect the health of the Jewish people. Many diseases and problems were prevented by obedience to these dietary laws. This understanding is attacked because based on the thinking that if this was the case, then it makes no sense for God to allow the eating of these animals under the new covenant. However, it is reasonable to think that in the more than 1,500 years from the time of the giving of the law of Moses to the first century church, there was a better understanding of what made some meat dangerous and other meat safe. Additionally, the swine has a divided hoof, but it does not chew the cud, so it is considered non-kosher. The Hebrew term used here refers to the wild pig. This animal is singled out perhaps because swine were considered especially offensive and to be avoided at all cost. It is now known that the pig is the intermediate host for several parasitic organisms, some of which can result in tapeworm infestation. Which is not good. These you may eat of all that are in the water. The rule again was simple. Any water creature having both fins and scales was kosher and could be eaten. There is evidence that fish without scales were also avoided by the Romans and Egyptians. These types of fish may have been regarded as scavengers, since they roamed the bottom of the sea. They were also the carriers of numerous parasites. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Among insects, any creeping insect was considered unclean, such as ants or grubs. Yet if they were a flying insect with legs jointed above their feet, they could be eaten. Good examples of clean insects include the locust, the cricket, and the grasshopper. The locust was eaten not only in those ancient times, in the time of John the Baptist, but also in the present day. Dr. Shaw ate of them in Barbary, fried and salted, and tells us they tasted very like crayfish. That creeps on all fours. Some people think this means Moses was uninformed and did not understand that most insects have 6 legs. The phrase used for creeps on all fours doesn't necessarily mean that. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Unclean animals, when dead, couldn't just be left in the community to rot. They had to be disposed of. But the people who disposed of the unclean animals had to deal with their uncleanness by washing in a brief until evening quarantine. This meant that if a dead rat was found in an Israelite village, it would be carefully and promptly disposed of, and the one disposing of it would wash afterward. This practice would help prevent disease in a significant way. When the bubonic plague, the Black Death, killed 1/4 of Europe's population in the 1300s, many Jewish communities were largely spared because they followed these hygienic regulations. Sadly, because these Jewish communities were often spared in the high death count from the plague, they were many times accused and punished for having caused the plague. Certainly sad chapters in the history of Christianity. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves. One great purpose of the dietary laws of Israel was to consecrate them, to sanctify them, or set them apart from the Gentile nations. For I am the Lord who brings you up out of Egypt. God had a claim to the obedience of the people of Israel because he was their Redeemer. He freed them from 400 years of Egyptian slavery. Israel was also obligated to God because he was their Creator, but he was also their Redeemer. Some Christians believe we are under obligation to observe these dietary laws of clean and unclean animals today. This is not true. First, these laws were specifically given to the children of Israel. Second, this issue was settled once and for all at the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. There it was determined that obedience to the laws of Moses were not required of the followers of Jesus. So as Paul wrote in Colossians 2:16, "So let no one judge you in food or in drink." Paul also explained that for Christians there is danger in legalistically declaring some foods forbidden for others. Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer. Some people live under bondage when it comes to food. They are addicted to eating certain foods that aren't helpful for them. The principle of 1 Corinthians 6:12 teaches us that it is wise to eat what is helpful to us, and we should not be under the power of what we eat. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Certainly many would benefit from the attitude of self-denial and bodily discipline Paul spoke of in 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27. Yet apart from these considerations, Christians are free to eat and not eat whatever they please, and no one should think themselves more right with God because they eat or don't eat certain things. As Romans 14:14 says, "I know and I am convinced by the Lord Jesus that there is nothing unclean of itself, but to him who considers anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean." If today we are not to be governed by the actual rules of this Hebrew law, the principle involved in it finds expression in the words of Paul. "Whatever therefore you eat or drink, or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God." Circumcision on the 8th day. God commanded Abraham that his male covenant descendants through Isaac and Jacob should be circumcised when 8 days old. This was a sign of the covenant God made with Abraham and his covenant descendants, and here is also commanded as an aspect of the law of Moses. She shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. When a son was born, a mother's ceremonial uncleanness lasted an additional 33 days, for a total of 40 days of ceremonial impurity after giving birth to a male child. There were several reasons for this, but one important reason was to give an Israelite mother an ancient equivalent to the modern maternity leave. Her ceremonial uncleanness relieved her of many social obligations. Mothers welcomed these days of rest, seclusion, and bonding with the newborn. She shall not touch any hallowed thing. The commanded time of ceremonial impurity should not be regarded as a negative attitude towards birth or childbearing on God's part. God commands childbearing in that humanity is commanded to be fruitful and multiply, that children are regarded as a gift from God, and that a woman with many children is considered blessed. She shall be unclean. Motherhood is one of the most sacred and beautiful things in the whole realm of human experience. This needs no argument. But motherhood is exercised in a race which is defiled. When the great singer of Israel, in his penitential psalm, said, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me," He was casting no reflection upon his own mother, but rather stating a racial fact from which no human being escapes. If she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks. The time period for each phase was double what was required when giving birth to a son. For the birth of a daughter, a woman was unclean for 14 days, followed by 66 days. A mother of a female child received double of the ancient equivalent of maternity leave. She shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. The longer period of ceremonial uncleanness for the birth of a daughter should not be understood as a penalty. Instead, it is linked to the idea, stated in the previous verse, that the time of impurity is for the symbolic responsibility of bringing other sinners into the world. When giving birth to a female, a mother brings a sinner into the world who will bring still other sinners into the world. It has also been suggested the longer period of time in connection with the birth of a girl was because girls are usually smaller at birth, and this would allow more time for the mother's focused care and attention on the child. As well, since sons were more prized, the longer time at home for a mother with a newborn girl would force the family to bond more deeply over a more extended period of time with the newborn girl. If she is not able to bring a lamb, God knew that not every family in Israel could afford to bring a lamb for sacrifice at the birth of a child. Therefore, he also allowed the lesser sacrifices of 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Jesus' family offered only a pair of turtle doves at birth. This shows that Jesus did not come from a wealthy family. It also means that the wise men who gave costly gifts to Jesus had not yet visited the family of Jesus. So the priest shall make atonement for her. This sacrifice marked the end of her time of ceremonial impurity. The mother was regarded as clean. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.